This video will be devoted to the 18th century. We're covering a relatively long period of time in just one video. This period of time is often regarded as largely transitional in a cultural sense, in a political sense. A lot's happening. It's a relatively unstable time. It would lead to the political revolutions, including the one in this country at the end of the 18th century. And so we don't really have the stable development of style that we saw in the 17th century with the Baroque traditions in the various European states. We're going to be looking primarily at France and the Rococo style, and then the reaction to that in art that we associate with the Enlightenment toward the middle and latter part of the century. I'm going to go to some images now. The term Rococo comes from the French word rocaille, which refers to pebbles. And the term is most explicitly associated with interior decoration. We'll look at some examples of that shortly. But the term has been generalized to refer to the artistic culture of the visual arts in a more general way, including painting, works of sculpture as well. You're looking on the screen at the Hotel Soubise. The term hotel is the French equivalent to the term palazzo in Italian and refers to a large urban building. And like palazzi in Italy, hotels are probably most often residential, but the term might also be applied to a city hall or to a hospital. That's called the Hotel Dieu. City hall is the Hotel de Ville. The Hotel Soubise, which we see here, was residential. And we're looking here at the entrance court. And you'll notice that on the exterior, the building is it's relatively restrained in its decoration. Big windows that let a lot of light into the interiors in a climate that it tends to be cloudy and darkish as compared with Italy. There are superimposed classical orders around the entrance and a pediment there, and works of sculpture. But the facade is flat across the front. It does not have the curves of Italian art. And as you'll see, the exterior is relatively staid in comparison with the interior. And this is rather typical of that relationship between inside and outside of Rococo buildings. We're looking here at the Room of the Princess. This is the work of Beaufrand and Natoire. And if we compare it to the Hall of Mirrors, well, we're looking at another interior view. Let's go ahead here. Here's the Hall of Mirrors. You can see we're looking at quite a different kind of architecture. Now let me back up and explain the social phenomenon that led to the creation of Rococo interiors. Louis XV ruled until 1715. He died as a relatively old man, given the age span at the time. And his successor was his great-grandson, who was a minor at the time. So there was a period of regency, which lasted between 1715 and 1723. And at that time, Louis XVI came to the throne. Excuse me, Louis XV, and he ruled for about 51 years, a long period of time for much of the 18th century. During the Regency, the members of the aristocracy, which had been confined quite strongly, not literally imprisoned, but effectively so at Versailles. They left Versailles. Many of them went to Paris, and they set up residence in elegant townhouses, hotels, and decorated them in the latest fashion, which was this emerging Rococo style, which we see on the screen. In comparison to the Hall of Mirrors, you can see which is of geometric shape, long, rectangular, a semicircular bare vaulted ceiling, very heavily decorated with pilasters, gilt capitals, dark painting on the ceiling. Rococo interiors tend to be more elegant in shape, oval or round. They do not have applied orders to the interiors in the form of columns or pilasters, but rather thin membering, which divides up the wall into panels, large windows, window doors that might be opened up onto balconies, and lots of mirrors. There is no clear division between wall and ceiling, but rather a kind of undulating line of molding. There are often paintings here in the cove, so that frankly the barrier, the division between ceiling and walls is obscure, is ambiguous, and the colors are lighter, whites, golds, pale colors on the ceiling. And the decorative motif that you see most often are things like shells and ribbons and pebbles, branches, birds. That is motifs taken from nature. If we back up here now, you can see the ceiling of the room of the princess in the Hotel Soubise in Paris. The paintings in the curve between wall and ceiling, and the abundant gilt decoration. This is really a design that integrates the visual arts. Of course, architecture is the primary art employed here, but it is elaborated, is ornamented with both painted and sculpted decoration, so that all three of the arts are merged into a kind of unified whole. We have to imagine the furniture as well that was added to the effect of lightness, of elegance, of gaiety. That furniture is primarily gone now, but it would have looked like this. We're looking here at sculpted decoration. This is the work by Clodion, and you've got one in your textbook. I can show you that at the same time. Here that is. This is called, let's see, Dancing. Let me check the title. Excuse me. Nymph and Satyr Carousing. We see on the left-hand side a satyr crowning a nymph. Now, the favorite material of Rococo sculptors was terracotta. Terracotta sculptures are created in a subtractive, in an additive technique rather than a subtractive one. In other words, you build up this clay material and you can mold it with the hands. It's soft, it's pliable. Delicate effects are easily achieved, as opposed to the subtracting of material from a block of marble to make a sculpture as Michelangelo would have done it. The material lends itself to the nice textural contrast you see between the smooth skin and the more detailed and highly textured hair, the details of flowers and drapery, so that the work has a strong sensuous appeal. Nymph and satyr carousing. The nymph is pouring wine into the mouth of the satyr, and over here, satyr is crowning the nymph. Now, these are smallish works. They're not monumental. They're not grand. They're about 2 feet in height. And these are the kind of sculpted decorations that would sit on tables, perhaps on pedestals, perhaps on a mantle, and would add ornamental appeal, ornamental focal points to a Rococo interior. The other room that's in your textbook now appears on the screen, and we're looking here at the central salon in the Amalienberg, which is a smallish kind of pavilion or smallish, not so much a residence, but a place where one might go for entertainment on the grounds of the Nymphenburg Palace just outside Munich. And this was the work of Francois Cuveliers. Now, he was a French artist in the employ of German patrons. And this really pushes Rococo to an even greater extreme of lightness, of elegance, of ornamental profusion. The room again is curvilinear in shape. There are abundant mirrors and windows that let in a lot of light and reflect that light. You can see no classical orders, no pilasters, no columns, no entablatures, but rather thin membering with abundant natural motifs. Notice, for example, the birds that appear against the ceiling and the sprigs of foliage that project from the cornice up into the ceiling. These were the settings for social engagements, where conversation would take place, where food and drink might be enjoyed, where music might be heard. One can imagine a chamber group playing a string quartet or a wind quintet in a setting like this. In the realm of painting, the term Rococo has been applied also to works by Antoine Watteau. Watteau is generally regarded as the greatest painter in France in the first half of the 18th century. He's an artist who lived a short life. He was born in the Flemish town of Valenciennes in the far north of France. When Watteau came to Paris to establish himself there, there was a controversy going on within the French Academy between the followers of Poussin, the Poussinese, and the Rubens, the followers of Rubens. And ultimately, the argument came down to which was superior, and that is design, line and design, or color. Poussinese, believing that design and line were the fundamental elements of artistic creation, and the Rubens placing a greater emphasis on color and in innovation and relativity of judgment. The paintings of Watteau lie in the camp of the Rubens, and ultimately they were the victors in this theoretical argument. We're looking here at Watteau's reception piece in joining the French Academy, becoming a full academician. So he was invited to submit a reception piece, and normally one did this in one of the established genres of painting of the time: history painting, portraiture, perhaps genre, still life, landscape. This was Rubens' submission. It's entitled A Pilgrimage to Cythera. Now, Cythera was the island in mythology that was sacred to Venus. And we see a statue here on the right-hand side, the bust of a female figure attached to an architectural base. This is called a herm. The figure is presumably Venus. So there are references to mythology. You'll also see cherubs or putti fluttering in air above a boat over here, which is propelled through the water by largely naked oarsmen. So these various things refer to mythology. Landscape is a prominent part of the painting. And we see here elegantly attired French people of the time who are coupled up, male-female couples. And it seems that they have visited this place. Your textbook will tell you that it's not exactly clear what's going on. The painting has been understood at times as showing them arriving, leaving for Cythera, arriving at Cythera, or leaving Cythera. It looks to me like really they're leaving. They've been here, they've enjoyed a time of social and amorous exchange, and they're having to leave now. And you notice the couple closest to the statue, they're still deeply engaged with one another, conversing, physically close to one another. The next couple, we see the man helping the woman to her feet. And in the next instance, a man is sort of guiding the woman who looks back yearningly, reluctantly, as if she does not wish to leave but has to, and they will descend the slope here toward the boat. So the painting contains elements of landscape, mythology, as one might expect to see in history painting, and genre. The French Academy didn't know which category to put this in. How to accept Watteau as a painter of historical paintings or genre paintings or something else. So they went to the extreme of inventing a new category to label this work, and that title was Fête Galante. Fête Galante, you'll find it in your textbook. Fête means festival, and galant, literally elegant. So this is an amorous gathering of elegantly attired people of the present time, enjoying the out of doors, enjoying each other. Watteau would go on to paint other fête galants, and this established a trend. There were other painters that took up this subject as well. Rococo paintings, I'll show you one or two others that that seem frivolous, licentious, a bit ridiculous. And yet, ultimately, I think this painting is not, in that we can all relate to it in remembering very pleasant days that we enjoyed in the company of others. Days that were so deeply satisfying, we hated to see them end, and yet inevitably they have to end. We have to return to the routines of daily life. And that seems to be, in essence, what's going on here. The softly defined landscape forms add a kind of sensuous nostalgia to the scene that makes that emotion of yearning and nostalgia in what's going on, I think, even more strongly felt. You'll notice here that the figures are thin and tall in their proportions, and this is typical of the work of Watteau. And if we go ahead here, we can see a single figure in a work called L'Indifférent, meaning the indifferent one. And notice that he seems to stand and move as if dancing. His figural proportions are, as we saw in the previous work, thin and elegant. His arms are extended outward in a very poised way. And if we compare this to the works of well, I've lost my image. I wanted to compare this to the figures of Rubens. And if you do that, and you can look in your textbook, you'll notice that they're heavy, weighty, they're substantial by comparison. So I make that comparison, or I want to make that comparison, in order to make clear this different figural ideal that Watteau brought to French painting. Small hands, small feet, the head is even small and the body very elongated. Now the work on the right-hand side shows us the more frivolous side of Rococo art, and this is by Jean-Honoré Fragonard, a painter from later in the 18th century, lived between 1732 and 1806. He was the student of Boucher, who was a very successful painter and the first painter to the king through his career. Fragonard developed a style of loose brushwork and buoyant curvilinear shapes, as we see in this work, which is entitled The Swing, or sometimes The Happy Accidents of the Swing, it's called, and it dates to 1776. This is a easel painting of modest size, about a yard square and a yard high, yard wide. All right, what's going on here is that we've got a trio of figures. The male figure on the right-hand side who's holding onto ropes attached to the swing. And so what he'll do is to pull the swing back and then let it swing freely forward. Normally, when we assist somebody on a swing, we push them forward and they swing freely back. So this works just the opposite way. This figure is variously identified as her husband or as the local bishop. Um, if it's her husband, then he is being cheated on in a way. If it's the bishop, then the bishop is being made into a fool by participating in this amorous little game. The figure in the foreground here, crouched down the foliage, who was the patron who commissioned the work of art, he is hidden here so that he might look up the dress of his mistress as she swings forward. And she's looking down. She seems to be aware of his presence. She's throwing her shoe up in the air at this moment, as if exulting in the pleasure and the silliness of the moment. Above the man is a pedestal, and on top of that is a statue by Clodion. This is an actual statue, which is quoted here, called Menacing Cupid. Now, in this case, menacing means that refers to the fact that the Cupid is holding his finger to his lips, indicating that they better keep quiet. They better keep their emotions under control if they wish for this game to go on. You'll notice that the landscape setting looks like maybe the Amazon jungle. It's much more abundant and profuse than one would see anywhere in France. There's hardly a straight line in the entire painting. It's all curvilinear shapes that reiterate, that repeat throughout the landscape the cloud-like shape of the woman's dress. There are a few straight lines in the swing, the ropes of the swing, and the pedestal here, but that's about it. So I think the landscape adds a kind of emphatic, sensual element that just re-emphasizes the amorous activity, the frankly erotic activity that's going on between the figures. It's silly, it's decadent, and perhaps this is generally indicative of the ways in which the French aristocracy whiled away their time, devoting it to sensual pleasure and ignoring the problems that grew within the nation of France, and this would lead soon to the French Revolution. One other architectural work I want to talk about on a larger scale. This takes us outside of France. We're looking on the screen here at the church of the 14 Heiligen. 14 Heiligen. And that term means 14 saints. 14 is 14. This is located in the countryside, but near the city of Staffelstein in central Germany, Franconia, Germany. And the church here is the work of Balthasar Neumann, the most important German architect of the 18th century. This is a pilgrimage church, a place where Christians would come to pray, where a miraculous vision had been seen by a shepherd in the 15th century. What he saw was the Christ child surrounded by 14 children. And this vision of children then was interpreted as the 14 saints in time of need. The exterior of the church looks a good bit like a Gothic building. Twin tower facade, grand, vertically oriented facade. There are Baroque features, particularly in the convex center of the building, framed by subtle concave curves. But like the Hotel Soubise, the outside is relatively restrained in comparison to the interior. And let's look at that. All right, here it is. Yeah, we go from the monochrome and modestly decorated exterior to this richly colored, light-filled interior. Now, there are two altars here. You might be a little surprised at what you see. Two altars There is the traditional main altar, liturgical altar, which is there in the distance at the very end of the church. But in addition, we have this altar in the center of our field of view, framed by an oval balustrade, and this is the pilgrimage site. This is where the vision of the by the shepherd boy was had. So Neumann had to contend with these two altar sites and somehow integrate them together. You'll notice that all we can see here are curves, concave curves that sweep away. And that is because the plan is mostly made up of ovals, which intersect one another. So you can see that the biggest oval is here, filling much of the nave of the church. This is reflected particularly in the entablature and in the location of the bases beneath the columns that are attached to small sections of wall. The columns they seem to be of marble. They're not actually marble, but something called Marmorstücke, marble work. They're an imitation marble. And this allowed these German architects to use marble or seeming marble, fictive marble of any color they wished. So here we have yellow marble, but there are bits of blue and pink in it as well. You notice the capitals are gilt. There are other sculptural motifs around candles and up in the frieze zone between capitals, above the cornice. There's hardly a straight line to be found, although the exterior of the church, outside the walls, we can't see it here. Those lines are straight. Here is a view of the vault overhead. This is a little skewed because it couldn't be photographed from directly underneath. That's where the pilgrimage altar is located. But you'll notice that there are curves and counter curves everywhere, shell-like shapes. It seems active, flowing, always moving. And we're looking then at the gilt decoration, which frames the ceiling painting. So again, the arts of architecture, sculpture, and painting are very cleverly integrated into a beautiful, harmonious whole. We've got one other view that shows us the vault beneath the crossing. So the crossing is the place where the long axis of the church intersects the lateral axis right here. And it's right here, we're looking at the top of the liturgical altar, and in this direction would be the pilgrimage altar. You'll notice that above the liturgical altar is an oval shape, and then there are circular shapes above the transept areas. There's another oval down here. These ovals project into the crossing area, which is suggested. There's an oval here suggested by the tops of the cornice, but we don't see it in the ceiling. Rather, we see up here what are called three-dimensional arches that bend in space as they cross from side to side. So the arch has height. It springs from a beginning point over here and lands over here. It has width. It crosses the space, but it also bends in doing so. It bends forward and back. Likewise, this arch does the same. Three-dimensional arches, something you don't see in classical art until the Baroque and Rococo periods. At the same time that this Rococo art was still flourishing in France, a very different alternative emerges to it, which we might associate with the Enlightenment. We call this Enlightenment style, although that's not a term widely used. Your textbook identifies a number of trends going on associated with the Enlightenment. By the Enlightenment, we're referring to the philosophical movement, primarily in England and then in France, which attempted to apply reason to human interactions, to bring institutions like the church and governments under scrutiny. An aim of the Enlightenment was to to argue for the freedom of human beings to think and believe as they wished. And it was thought that if human reason could be applied to the problems of the time, that real progress would be achieved. Um, there was a belief in the value of change, in progress, and even in the perfectibility of mankind. The Industrial Revolution had its beginnings at this time period, so that science and engineering take on a greater role. Manufacturing becomes more and more mechanized, and this holds out the possibility of um, a greater abundance of goods and services available to more people. Um, in France, an encyclopedia was commissioned by the mistress of the king, Madame de Pompadour was her name. And this encyclopédie was gathered together, assembled by Diderot and D'Alembert. And this effort can be seen as democratizing knowledge, bringing all knowledge together into a great multi-volume work. There were, I think, 32 volumes in all that came out over a couple decades of time. But that knowledge then was available to a wide array of people, anybody that could afford or get access to the, um, the various articles and illustrations that were gathered within this encyclopedia. To look at some art that reflects some of these developments, we're seeing on the screen here the work of Joseph Wright of Derby. So the last name is Wright of Derby. And this painting is entitled The Experiment on a Bird in an Air Pump. You have in your textbook a different work by Wright of Derby, and that is a philosopher giving a lecture at the orrery being a model of the universe that would allow the rotations of the planets to be seen and studied. I'm showing you this different work, which is the experiment on a bird in an air pump. I don't recall the date, but it's about the same. That is about 1760. So the experimenter here is a long-haired figure wearing a house coat who is seen at the center of the painting. And the experiment simply involves pumping the air out of a glass orb in which this bird is located. That will create a vacuum, and without air to breathe, the bird will expire. This is being observed by a group of people. The first thing that one notices about this is the strong contrast of light and dark. And this is something that Wright of Derby experimented in many works. The dramatic lighting that takes place here around the experiment is echoed in the lighting outside. There's a boy over here who is raising the blind over a window, and we see moonlight outside. So it looks like even a full moon. And that full moon would dramatically light up the landscape and be a focal point within the landscape, just as there is a light here, which illuminates the faces of the people watching this event take place. The observers include the ages of humanity. So we've got children here, and notice that these girls, they expect the bird to expire, and they are upset by the prospect of that. They're grieving and being consoled by their father. And maybe he's saying that the air will be restored to the bird will be okay. We have an elderly man here in the foreground who is not observing what's happening, but is looking downward and seems to be contemplating um, the nature of the experiment and the meaning of the experiment. There are boys that over here that follow the experiment with great interest. And here we have a couple who seem not to care much about the experiment. They're looking into each other's eyes. As we've seen in a few earlier paintings, people react in a variety of ways. depending upon their backgrounds and their individual temperaments. Um, we see here something of the passions of the soul, which differ from individual to individual. Back to the lighting, we might compare this to, on the right-hand side, excuse me, go back, put both works up simultaneously, the lighting of Caravaggio, the originator of these strong light and dark contrasts that add high drama to what's depicted. But in the case of Caravaggio, it is religious truth that is being revealed. The light takes on the symbolic value of divine enlightenment in the work of Caravaggio. In the case of Derby, it's scientific truth. It's the knowledge of the world, this new knowledge of the world that is being revealed, in which the strong light and dark contrasts are employed to dramatize. So the two paintings show a shift in interest away from the church and the teachings of the church to a greater interest in the world, the workings of the world, and an effort to understand the way things work and to then use that knowledge for the betterment of humanity. All right, another work that shows us an alternative to Rococo painting is this um, by Jean-Baptiste Simeon Chardin. Chardin is the last name of the painter. Chardin was a specialist in the painting of um, still life and genre scenes. He was a member of the French Academy, but at that lower level of a genre painter. And here we're looking at a work entitled Grace, as labeled in your textbook, or Saying Grace. This dates from 1740. Genre paintings were typically small, and this is under 2 feet in height. It was really quite small. And what this shows is a mother or perhaps a governess of these children. They are about to begin a midday meal. Looks like a meal of soup, and they're pausing to give thanks for this meal. Your textbook identifies the children as two girls, but I think more often the child in the foreground is identified as a boy. Boys wore girls' clothing at this time in middle class and upper class families until they were into their 6th or 7th or 8th year of age. And you'll notice that the child has on a padded cap to protect its head against falls to the ground. The toys around, we've got a drum hanging over the chair, would seem to indicate a boy more than a little girl. The older sibling back here sitting on the chair seems to look upon the younger child in a way that suggests guidance, correction, as he or she, whichever it is, attempts to say grace. Chardin was a gifted painter of material objects like the pots you see here in the foreground. They look very different. They give a kind of metallic sheen in contrast to the upholstery. And it's a painting that really celebrates in a modest way, in a kind of understated way, the values of running a home where children feel provided for and loved, where everybody has enough. It celebrates domestic values. We're looking here at a painting by Greuze, Jean-Baptiste Greuze, Greuze, and this is entitled Village Bride. It dates from 1761. Greuze was a member of the French Academy as a painter of genre scenes. And the little drama that's going on here is one that I think bears a strong comparison with the novels of the time, where figures tend to have somewhat stock identities and interact in interesting and evolved ways. What's depicted is the establishment of a marriage between the daughter in this family and her new spouse. But what we're not seeing here a church wedding, but rather a working out of the marital arrangement. The young man has just been handed his dowry, that is a sack of coins by the father, and the father now seems to give his blessing to the marriage. And all this is witnessed by a notary who's sitting here in the foreground, surrounded by the other children in the family. You can see that the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, a whole a whole flock of children who respond in different ways to these events. The A younger sister grasps her older sister, who's about to leave the house, affectionately. She's sorry that relationship will grow distant. The older sister over here seems to look on with envy, wishing she was the one that got married. And here's the mother who grasps the arm of her daughter. Uh, the setting is the family home. And notice that the back wall here is parallel to the picture plane. We see a staircase, a fragment going up to an upper level. It's been observed that the painting looks very much like a stage set, very simply appointed. And the whole story and setting suggests something was popular in the theater at the time, and that's called the drame bourgeois, that is bourgeois dramas, and the events that take place within a bourgeois household and to a bourgeois family. There is an animal motif here in the foreground that echoes what the humans are doing, because you'll notice here's a hen and her chicks, and the hen is located nearby protectively, seeing to the welfare of her chicks, just as the parents are seeing to the welfare of their daughter, as well as their other children who crowd around as observers and as loving siblings. And finally, we're looking on the screen here at a work by the English painter Sir Joshua Reynolds. This is called Lord Heathfield. There was a shift in portraiture of this time away from depicting aristocrats, at least not so extensively, and rather what might be called great men who, because of their actions, because of their accomplishments, made substantial contributions to their societies, to their cultures. Now, in this case, Heathfield was the general of the British fort at Gibraltar, which was attacked at various times, and he successfully resisted the attacks and kept the fort within British control. It still is to this day. You'll notice he's holding here a key, and this indicates his retention of British control of that fort. The things around him suggest battle. There's a cannon here that is aimed downward, and there is smoke coming up into the air. It both frames but suggests a battle that he has endured and emerged triumphant from. He's shown not idealistically, as we saw the depiction of Charles I or Louis XIV, but more realistically in appearance. He's a kind of a heavy set, a portly man, ruddy face. And he looks up into the air, not at us, but up into the air reflectively, as if pondering the difficulties that he has just been through and endured in a triumphant way. This is an example of the grand manner portraiture which Reynolds developed, and what that meant was to depict great men in a complementary way, surrounded by things that tell us something about their accomplishments, as we see here. All right, this takes us then to the end of the century and the beginnings of neoclassicism, which we'll take up in the next lecture.